I used to joke with myself, quietly of course, that my parents didn't raise a daughter, they trained a servant. That's how it always felt, day after day, year after year. My mornings didn't begin with a smile or a hug or even a simple good morning, they began with orders, sharp voices echoing down the hallway before I could even wipe the sleep from my eyes. My mother's voice was always the first thing I heard, sharp like broken glass, shouting commands that sounded less like requests and more like commands you give to a worker you don't respect. "Don't forget to iron Matthew's shirt, he has an important day, unlike you," she would yell, making sure to slip in the reminder that my brother's life mattered more than mine. Matthew never lifted a finger for himself, not because he couldn't, but because he never had to. He would smirk from the couch, scrolling endlessly on his phone, while I stood sweating over the ironing board, making sure not a single wrinkle ruined his precious shirt. Emily was no better. If Matthew acted like a king, she behaved like a spoiled queen. She would toss her dresses at me like I was her personal maid, snapping her fingers in irritation if I didn't rush fast enough. "Can you hurry with the laundry? My dress needs to be ready for tonight's party," she would whine, as if the entire world might collapse if her sequined dress wasn't perfectly pressed in time for her night out. And then there was my father. He never shouted, never demanded anything, but his silence was heavier than their insults. When I tried to sit with the family, when I dared to open my mouth and offer an opinion, he wouldn't even look at me. His eyes slid right over me like I was a shadow on the wall. Sometimes I thought I would rather have him yell at me than pretend I didn't exist. At least anger is an acknowledgement. Indifference makes you feel like you're already dead. But here's the thing, I wasn't stupid, and I wasn't lazy. I worked harder than anyone else in that house, but when the chores were done and the lights were out, I opened my laptop and I studied. I devoured business books, case studies, stories of self-made entrepreneurs who built fortunes from nothing. While my siblings wasted their nights scrolling through social media or watching TV, I sat hunched over my notebooks, scribbling ideas and practicing strategies. I wasn't just dreaming, I was preparing. But to my parents, I was only the girl who helps, the one who fetched, folded, scrubbed, and carried, never the one who could lead. I remember one night with perfect clarity, the night that still burns in my chest like a scar. I was studying in my room, headphones in, working through an online course I had paid for by secretly saving money from tutoring kids in the neighborhood. I was exhausted, but my heart was alive with excitement because I was finally learning something that made me feel like I was building a future. Then my mother barged in without knocking. She snatched my notebook off the desk, scanned the pages filled with my messy handwriting, and laughed, not softly, not nervously, but cruelly, like the very idea of me having a dream was comedy. "What's this? You think you're going to be some big businesswoman? Stop dreaming, girl. People like us don't make it big. Focus on what's real, helping this family," she sneered before tossing the notebook back onto the desk like it was garbage. I sat there frozen, my chest tight, my throat aching. I wanted to scream, to shout that I wasn't like them, that I was meant for more, but the words stayed trapped inside, heavy and choking. She shook her head, muttering something about wasted electricity, and walked out without even closing the door. That night, I buried my face in my pillow, tears soaking through the fabric, my body shaking so hard I thought the mattress might break beneath me. I cried quietly, careful not to let a single sob escape into the hallway where they might hear and mock me even more. But in the middle of the storm of tears, when my chest ached and my eyes burned, a voice inside me whispered with a clarity that scared me. "One day, they'll regret this. One day, you'll prove them wrong." I repeated that thought again and again, like a prayer, like a shield, until I fell asleep with swollen eyes and a clenched jaw. Because deep down, despite everything they wanted me to believe, I knew I wasn't born to be their maid. I was born for something more. Silence in my house was never gentle, never the peaceful kind people talk about when they say they love a quiet home. It was heavy and suffocating, the kind of silence that presses down on your chest until you can barely breathe. The kind that makes you feel smaller with every passing second, and it was the language my parents spoke to me most fluently. They didn't need to scream at me every day, they didn't need to call me names every hour, because the way they ignored me, the way their eyes slid past me like I was invisible, the way their mouths stayed shut when I was desperate for one word of acknowledgement, that silence screamed louder than anything else. I remember dinners more vividly than I want to, not because the food was memorable but because they were the same night after night, the same routine that carved itself into my memory like an unwanted tattoo. I would stand in the kitchen balancing trays of plates, making sure everything was hot, fresh, and ready before carrying it to the table where my parents, Matthew, and Emily were already seated, waiting for me to serve them like some waitress in a restaurant that I never volunteered to work at. Once, just once, I tried to sit down with them after placing the last plate, thinking maybe I had earned a chance to eat like family instead of staff, but before I could even lift my fork, my mother shot me a look sharp enough to pierce steel and said, "Did you clean the pans yet? The longer you wait, the harder the grease sets." And that was it. I stood up, carried my half-empty plate back to the kitchen, and ate alone after everyone else was done. That was normal. That was my life. But there was one night that still plays in my head like a broken record, one I don't think I'll ever forget. I had gotten accepted into a small internship program at a local firm. It wasn't paid, but to me it was gold. It meant someone out there saw me as something other than a servant, someone thought I had potential. My heart pounded in my chest the whole way home, rehearsing how I'd tell them, imagining maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Maybe my father's lips would twitch into the smallest smile, maybe my mother would nod with a flicker of pride, maybe my siblings would tease me but in the way that hinted at respect beneath the laughter. But when I told them at the dinner table, my voice trembling with hope, the silence that followed was deafening. My father didn't look up from his plate, didn't even pause in chewing. My mother reached across me to grab another serving of potatoes as if I hadn't spoken, and Matthew leaned back in his chair, smirking, before muttering, "Unpaid? So basically you're volunteering to be a slave outside the house too. Guess it suits you." Emily snickered, covering her mouth with her perfectly manicured fingers, and that was it, silence again, heavier than before, a silence that told me without words that what I had done, what I was proud of, was worthless to them. I felt my face burning, the weight of humiliation sinking into my bones. I wanted to slam my fists on the table, I wanted to scream that it mattered, that it was a step forward, that they couldn't keep dismissing me forever, but my throat closed up and I did what I always did, I swallowed the pain, forced a small smile, and got up to refill their drinks, my hands trembling as I poured water into glasses that I wanted to smash on the floor. That's when it hit me. Their silence wasn't just neglect, it was strategy, it was how they erased me, how they made sure I never forgot my place. And yet, as painful as it was, there was a part of me that refused to let their silence define me completely. In the quiet of my own room, when the house was finally still, I would sit at my desk with my laptop glowing faintly in the dark and I would devour knowledge like it was oxygen. Business books, articles, case studies, success stories of people who had been told no 100 times before the world finally said yes, those were my fuel. I memorized their words, underlined sentences that lit a fire in my chest, whispered quotes into the night like they were spells keeping me alive. While Matthew wasted hours on video games and Emily spent entire evenings scrolling Instagram and trying on outfits in her mirror, I was studying marketing strategies, financial planning, negotiation techniques. I was building something they couldn't see, something they couldn't silence, a foundation deep inside me that no one could bulldoze. But it wasn't easy. Every time I tried to save a little money from tutoring kids down the street, my father would ask me to chip in for bills or guilt me into buying groceries. "Family comes first, don't be selfish," he would say, as if wanting to build a future was selfish. Every time I stayed up late, my mother would scoff, "Who do you think you're fooling? No one is going to pay you for wasting your time reading those silly things." Every time I dared to hint at leaving the house one day, Matthew would laugh, "You can't even stand up for yourself here, how are you going to survive out there?" And Emily, with her fake sweet smile, would add, "Oh, face it, you were born to serve, not to lead." Their words cut me, their silence buried me, but somehow, both became fuel. Every plate I scrubbed, every floor I mopped, every insult I swallowed fed the furnace burning inside me, a furnace that whispered, not forever, not always, not you. I started to see my life as training, not punishment, every chore as proof I could work harder than anyone, every silence as a challenge to find my own voice, every insult as a spark making me tougher. I didn't know when or how, but I knew one thing as clearly as I knew my own name. One day, their silence would break, and when it did, my voice would be too loud, too strong, too undeniable for them to ever erase me again. I don't know exactly when the dam inside me cracked. Maybe it wasn't one moment but 100 smaller ones stacked on top of each other until the weight finally became too heavy to carry. Maybe it was all the times my father walked past me as if I was a shadow. All the times my mother's eyes narrowed with disappointment before I even opened my mouth. All the times Matthew mocked me like it was his sport. All the times Emily's fake sympathy turned into laughter behind my back. But I know the exact night I broke, the night their silence and scorn finally pushed me over the edge. The night I realized I wasn't going to survive if I didn't fight back. It was late, later than usual. The house smelled like fried chicken and perfume, the kind of perfume Emily sprayed too much of before posting selfies, and I had spent the entire evening cooking, cleaning, serving, smiling through clenched teeth, and praying I could retreat to my room before another round of insults started. I thought I was safe, thought maybe tonight would pass quietly, but then it happened. Matthew sat back in his chair, burping loudly, and looked straight at me with that cruel glint in his eyes, the one that meant he had a new game to play. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing at the corner of the table, a smear so small only someone desperate to humiliate me would have noticed. Emily laughed and added, "Seriously, how do you expect to survive in the real world when you can't even wipe a table right?" My mother didn't correct them, didn't tell them to stop. She just sipped her wine and looked at me with that mixture of pity and disdain, the look that always screamed, "Why can't you be better? Why can't you be more?" My father finally chimed in, his voice heavy with authority, "Stop standing there like an idiot and do what you're supposed to. That's your role in this house. Don't forget it." Something inside me snapped. I felt the sting of tears rise, but instead of letting them fall, heat spread through my chest. My hands curled into fists, my heart hammered so hard it echoed in my ears. I was done. Done being their maid, their punching bag, their invisible ghost. "No," I said, my voice trembling but louder than I expected. The whole room froze. Matthew smirked like he couldn't believe I dared to speak. "What did you just say?" he asked, leaning forward. My father's fork clattered onto his plate, his eyes narrowing like knives. "What did you say to me?" he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. My knees shook but I forced myself to stand taller. "I said no," I answered, this time louder, steadier, sharper. "I'm not your maid. I'm not your servant. I'm your daughter, and I deserve respect." The silence that followed wasn't the usual suffocating silence, it was different, it was shocked, brittle, like glass about to shatter. My mother's face twisted in horror, Matthew laughed in disbelief, Emily gasped dramatically like she was watching a soap opera, and my father's hand slammed down on the table so hard the plates rattled. "You ungrateful brat," he thundered, his face red with fury, "everything you have is because of this family, everything you eat, everything you wear, and this is how you repay us? By disrespecting us at our table?" My voice shook but I didn't back down, something in me had unlocked, a voice that had been buried for years was clawing its way out. "What do I have?" I shot back. "Hand-me-down clothes? Scraps of food after you're done? A room that barely feels like mine? You've treated me like I'm nothing, like I don't exist, but guess what, I do exist, and one day you're going to regret every single time you acted like I didn't matter." Matthew scoffed, rolling his eyes, "Yeah right, like you're ever going to be more than this. Face it, sis, this is all you're good for." Emily smirked, "You'll come crawling back when the world chews you up and spits you out, begging us to take you in." My father's voice boomed again, "As long as you live under my roof, you'll follow my rules, and my rule is this, you don't talk back. Now clean the damn table." But instead of obeying, instead of shrinking like I always did, I stepped forward, my hands trembling but my voice clear. "Then maybe I won't live under your roof anymore." Their faces froze, the entire room stiffened. It was as if time itself had stopped. My father stared at me, his jaw tight, his knuckles white around his glass. My mother whispered, "You don't mean that." But I did. For the first time in my life, I meant it with every fiber of my being. My chest heaved, my pulse raced, but the words poured out like fire. I'm not staying here forever. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life serving people who can't even see me. I'm going to build something of my own, something bigger than this house, bigger than your rules, bigger than every insult you've thrown at me. You think I'm nothing? Watch me. One day, you're going to eat those words. The room erupted, Matthew mocking, Emily sneering, my father shouting, but I didn't hear them, not really, because inside my head a voice louder than all of theirs combined whispered the truth I had finally allowed myself to believe. I can do this. I will do this. I will break free. And in that moment, in that storm of chaos and rage, I felt something new bloom in my chest, hope, fierce and unstoppable, the kind of hope that tasted like freedom. The night I decided to leave wasn't planned like a grand escape. It wasn't dramatic with bags packed and a taxi waiting outside. It was quiet, impulsive, desperate, born out of the fire that had been building inside me since the night I told my father no. I couldn't sleep, my body restless, my heart pounding in the silence of my small room, the walls closing in on me like a prison cell. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the creaks of the house, the faint hum of the fridge downstairs, the muffled sound of Matthew's video games through the wall, and I thought, if I stay here one more night, I'll lose myself completely. The thought hit me so hard it made me sit up in bed, clutching the blanket to my chest as tears burned my eyes. Leaving meant uncertainty, danger, hunger, maybe even failure, but staying meant death, the death of my spirit, my dreams, my voice. So I swung my legs over the side of the bed and started moving. I didn't pack much, because what did I really own? A few worn clothes, a cheap second-hand laptop I had bought with babysitting money, a notebook filled with ideas and doodles of the business I dreamed of starting someday. I shoved it all into a backpack, my hands shaking, my breath quickening, every sound amplified, like the universe was warning me not to do it. When I reached for the door, my heart nearly stopped, terrified that it would creak loud enough to wake the whole house, but it opened with only the faintest whisper, and I slipped out into the hallway, the darkness swallowing me whole. The stairs groaned under my weight, each step a battle against the fear that someone would wake up, catch me, drag me back to my room. I pictured my father's furious face, Matthew's mocking grin, Emily's smug laughter, and the thought nearly froze me in place. But then another thought pushed me forward, the vision of a future where I wasn't their maid, where I wasn't invisible, where I was standing tall in my own life. That vision burned brighter than the fear. I reached the front door, my fingers trembling as I turned the knob, and for the first time in my life, I stepped out into the night not as their daughter, not as their servant, but as myself. The cool air hit me like a shock, filling my lungs with freedom and terror all at once. The street was quiet, the moon casting silver light on the pavement, the world both empty and full of possibility. I didn't have a plan beyond this moment, didn't know where I'd sleep, didn't know how I'd eat, but I knew one thing, I couldn't go back. I walked fast, almost running, the backpack bouncing against my shoulders, my sneakers slapping against the concrete as if each step was erasing the chains that had bound me for so long. I didn't stop until the house was far behind me, a shadow in the distance, and when I finally turned back to look, I whispered under my breath, "Goodbye." The first few nights were brutal, the kind of brutal that tests whether your dreams are stronger than your fear. I slept on a friend's couch the first night, a girl from high school who didn't ask too many questions but pressed a few dollars into my hand before I left the next morning. The second night I found a cheap motel, the kind where the wallpaper peeled and the sheets smelled faintly of cigarettes, and I stared at the ceiling wondering if I had made a mistake. My stomach growled from skipping dinner, my body ached from exhaustion, and for a brief moment I wanted to run back home, beg for forgiveness, slip back into the role of maid just so I wouldn't feel this gnawing emptiness. But then I opened my backpack, pulled out my notebook, and looked at the words I had scribbled months ago when I still dared to dream. One day I will sign a contract that proves I am worth more than they ever believed. Reading those words steadied me. I wasn't going back. I picked up odd jobs at first, waiting tables, cleaning offices at night, anything that paid enough to keep me afloat. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, but every dollar I earned felt different, it felt like mine. I worked until my feet blistered, until my hands were raw, until my eyelids drooped, but the fire inside me never dimmed. Each paycheck, no matter how small, felt like another brick in the foundation of the future I was building. Every insult from the past echoed in my mind, but instead of crushing me, it fueled me. When Matthew's voice whispered, "You'll never be more than this," I worked an extra shift. When Emily's sneer hissed, "You'll come crawling back," I saved another dollar. When my father's command thundered, "As long as you live under my roof," I reminded myself, I don't live under your roof anymore. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, it wasn't instant, but for the first time in my life, the silence around me wasn't suffocating, it was peaceful, it was mine, and in that silence, I began to grow. Working those endless shifts felt like running on a treadmill, sweating and panting but staying in the same place, and there were nights when I collapsed onto a borrowed couch or the lumpy mattress in my motel room and thought, maybe this is all there is, maybe I'll never climb higher, but then I would open my notebook, run my fingers over the scribbled ideas, and remind myself that I wasn't built to stay invisible. I didn't know when or how, but I knew opportunity had to exist for me somewhere, and I clung to that thought like a lifeline. My days blurred together, early mornings making coffee for strangers who didn't bother to look me in the eye, late nights scrubbing floors while the world slept, stolen hours in between where I scribbled business plans on napkins or researched contracts on a cracked old laptop, but I never stopped moving forward, even if it felt like crawling. And then one afternoon, when the sun was pouring through the grimy diner window and I was balancing 3 plates on my arm, it happened. A man in a sharp suit sat in my section, the kind of man who looked like he belonged in glass offices, not greasy diners. He was flipping through a folder, muttering numbers under his breath, completely absorbed in work. When I set down his coffee, I couldn't help glancing at the spreadsheets spilling across the table, columns of figures and contract drafts, and something inside me stirred. Numbers had always made sense to me, while my family dismissed me as nothing. Numbers whispered order, possibility, opportunity. Without thinking, I blurted out, "You're calculating that wrong. If you carry that percentage, you're going to undersell yourself by almost 20%. The words slipped out before I could stop them, and immediately my face went red. "Idiot, why would you say that? He's going to laugh at you just like your family does." But instead of brushing me off, the man paused, his pen frozen in the air, and slowly looked up at me. His eyebrows furrowed, not in anger but in surprise. "Excuse me," he asked, his voice calm but curious. My throat tightened, my palms sweaty as I set the plates down too quickly, nearly spilling gravy on his papers. I'm sorry," I stammered. "I just noticed the formula you're using, and if you adjust the margin here," I grabbed a pen from my apron before my brain could scream stop, leaned over, and circled a number. "You'll actually gain leverage in the negotiation instead of losing it." The diner noise seemed to fade, my heart pounding so loud I thought everyone could hear it. The man studied my notes, his eyes scanning back and forth, and then, to my shock, he chuckled softly. "You're right," he said, more to himself than to me. Then he looked up, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "Do you have a background in contracts?" The question caught me off guard, and for a split second, shame flooded me. I wanted to say no, wanted to admit I was just a waitress scraping by, wanted to shrink back into invisibility. But something stronger pushed me forward. "Not officially," I admitted, my voice steadier than I felt, "but I've been teaching myself. I want to work in business someday. I know I don't look like much right now, but I pay attention. I learn fast. And I won't waste an opportunity if it comes my way." The man's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion but in assessment, like he was weighing the truth of my words. Finally, he extended his hand. "Name's Mr. Henderson. I run a consulting firm downtown. If you're serious, stop by my office tomorrow. Let's see what you've got." For a moment I just stared at his hand, afraid if I touched it the whole thing would vanish like a dream, but then I gripped it, firm and certain, and whispered, "I'll be there." That night, I barely slept, tossing and turning with equal parts fear and excitement. What if I failed? What if he realized I was just a girl who had run away, with no degree, no family support, no polished resume? But every time the doubts clawed at me, I remembered the fire that had carried me this far, the fire that said you are not their maid, you are not nothing, you are more. I polished my one decent pair of shoes, pressed my thrift store blazer, and the next morning, with my backpack full of notes and hope, I walked into Henderson Consulting like I belonged there. The lobby smelled like leather and success, the kind of place my family would have laughed at me for even imagining, but as I signed in and waited to be called, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, possibility. And when Mr. Henderson ushered me into his office and slid a mock contract across the table, challenging me to find the weak spots, I didn't hesitate. I circled, underlined, explained, my voice steady, my mind alive, every ounce of knowledge I had scraped together finally spilling out. When I finished, the room went quiet, and for a terrifying second, I thought I had blown it. But then Henderson leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You're rough around the edges," he said, "but you've got something. Something real. I'm willing to take a chance on you." In that moment, the air rushed out of me, tears pricked my eyes, and I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. For the first time, someone outside of me saw what I had always believed deep down, that I was worth something. That night, as I left his office with a promise of a trial position and my heart pounding with gratitude, I whispered into the cool evening air, "This is it. This is where it starts." And for the first time in my life, I didn't just believe it, I knew it. Walking into Henderson Consulting every morning felt like stepping into another universe, a place where polished shoes clicked against marble floors, where conversations floated through the air filled with words like leverage, negotiation, and profit margins, a place where everyone carried themselves with confidence like they had been born to belong here, and yet there I was, a girl with a thrift store blazer and a backpack full of borrowed dreams. At first, I felt like an imposter every second of every day, like any moment someone would grab me by the arm, drag me to the door, and laugh, "Who let the maid in here?" But I forced myself to keep my head high, even when my knees trembled beneath the desk. Mr. Henderson wasn't easy on me, and I didn't want him to be. He tested me, tossed documents on my desk with deadlines that made my stomach drop, and asked questions in meetings that made my brain scramble for answers. "Find the loophole in this contract by 5 o'clock, he'd say, "or if you were negotiating this deal, how would you defend the margin?" I stumbled, I froze, I made mistakes, but instead of running away like I had been conditioned to do at home, I stayed, I fought, I learned. I stayed up late studying, highlighting textbooks from the library, scribbling notes until my eyes blurred. When I got something wrong, I didn't let it crush me, I let it teach me. Every failure was fuel, every correction a step upward, every long night another brick in the foundation I was building. Not everyone welcomed me. Some of the other employees, sleek in their designer suits, gave me side eyes that burned holes in my back. I overheard whispers once, "Who is she? Henderson just picked her up off the street. She doesn't have a degree. She doesn't belong here." The words stung, but they weren't new, they were echoes of what I had already lived through at home. And instead of breaking me, they steeled me. I muttered to myself in the bathroom mirror, "Let them talk. You'll outwork them all." And I did. I arrived earlier than anyone, left later, volunteered for projects no one else wanted, combed through contracts until my head ached, and slowly, grudgingly, they stopped laughing. But the climb wasn't just about the office. It was about survival outside of it too. I was still living paycheck to paycheck, splitting meals to stretch them, juggling rent for a tiny room that barely fit a bed. There were nights I sat on that bed, exhausted to my bones, clutching my notebook and wondering if it was worth it, if chasing this dream was just foolish pride. And then I would remember the look on my father's face when I said no, the mocking laugh of Matthew, the sneer of Emily, the silence of my mother, and my fire would roar back to life. I wasn't just working for a paycheck, I was working for freedom, for dignity, for the chance to look them in the eye one day and say, "You were wrong about me." Months passed, and my persistence started to pay off. Henderson began trusting me with real tasks, small negotiations, actual client meetings. I'll never forget the first time he leaned over in a conference room and said, "Take this one." My heart nearly exploded, but I steadied my voice and laid out my argument, clear and sharp. The client raised an eyebrow, tested me with a counterpoint, and I countered right back, my words precise, my reasoning solid. When the meeting ended and the client shook Henderson's hand with a smile, Henderson glanced at me, a rare flicker of pride in his eyes. "Not bad," he said. And coming from him, that meant the world. The climb was brutal, exhausting, relentless, but with every late night, every challenge, every battle, I felt myself changing. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was becoming someone new, someone stronger, sharper, unshakable. For the first time, I didn't feel like the invisible maid in my own story. I felt like the architect of my future. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The day I landed my first major contract felt like the world had shifted under my feet, the kind of moment you read about in books but never imagined happening to you, and yet there I was, staring at a signed agreement worth $4 million, my hands trembling so hard I had to set the pen down twice before finishing the signature. The office was buzzing, phones ringing, assistants scurrying, but I felt like I was floating above it all, every insult, every moment of invisibility, every chore I had done at home, every time my parents had told me I was nothing. All of it had led to this. When Mr. Henderson came over, a rare smile breaking across his usually stoic face, he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You did it. You've earned this. Not just because of the contract, but because you never quit, even when it seemed impossible." I wanted to cry right there on the polished office floor, the fluorescent lights casting halos around my head, because for the first time, someone outside my small, suffocating home saw me as capable, as competent, as worth something. I couldn't wait to call my family. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would finally make them see me, make them realize I wasn't their maid, I wasn't their shadow, I wasn't invisible. I called my mother first, my voice shaking with excitement. "Mom," I said, trying to keep it steady, "I did it. I signed my first major contract, it's worth $4 million. There was silence on the line, the kind of silence that made my stomach twist into knots, and then she laughed, soft at first, then sharp, almost nervous, and said, "4 million? Is this some kind of joke?" I felt my face heat up. "No, Mom. I'm serious. This is real. I worked for it. I earned it." She scoffed. "Well, that's surprising." It wasn't pride, it wasn't encouragement, it was disbelief, and I realized that after all these years, that was all they could give me. I hung up, a strange mix of triumph and sadness twisting in my chest. Then I called Matthew and Emily, expecting maybe teasing, maybe jealousy, maybe even praise, but their voices were the same as always. Matthew laughed and said, $4 million? You're going to blow it all, just wait. Emily smirked. "Yeah, good luck keeping it together, little sis, we'll see how long this fantasy lasts." And yet, instead of breaking me, it fueled me further. I whispered to myself, "Watch me." Because for the first time in my life, I had proof in the real world, not just dreams in a notebook, that I could rise above everything they ever told me, everything they ever did to keep me small. I didn't stop there. I celebrated quietly that night in my small apartment, ordering takeout I could actually enjoy without fear of criticism, staring at the signed contract on my desk and tracing the numbers with my finger. $4 million. 4 million reasons to believe in myself, 4 million bricks in the foundation of the life I was building, 4 million reasons to never go back. And as I sat there, exhausted but exhilarated, I finally allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The fire inside me had not just survived the climb, it had ignited. I realized in that moment that I was no longer the invisible girl who scrubbed floors and ironed shirts. I was someone who could change her own story, someone who could take every insult and every moment of neglect and transform it into power. And in that quiet victory, I understood something deeper than money or recognition. I had finally earned respect, from the world, from myself, and in time, from those who had doubted me most. The thought of seeing my family after everything I had endured made my stomach twist in knots, a mix of fear, anger, and something like anticipation that I hadn't felt in years. I remembered the nights lying awake in that suffocating house, pretending to sleep while they whispered about me like I wasn't even in the room. The nights I scrubbed floors until my hands bled. The mornings I served breakfast while my father and siblings laughed at my expense. The way my mother's eyes would barely glance at me before dismissing my existence. Every single memory surged back as I prepared for this moment. The night I would finally face them not as their maid, not as the ignored daughter, but as someone they could no longer ignore. I didn't pack gifts or apologies. I packed confidence, experience, and the undeniable proof of my worth, a $4 million contract that represented every ounce of effort, struggle, and resilience I had poured into myself. I arrived at the charity gala in Malibu, the ocean waves glimmering under the sunset, the horizon streaked with gold and orange, the perfect cinematic backdrop for the confrontation I had imagined so many times in my head. I wore a tailored navy blue dress, hair pinned back elegantly, heels that clicked sharply against the polished marble floor as I walked in, each step echoing like a drumbeat of determination. My breath caught when I saw them, my father, my mother, Matthew, and Emily, standing together awkwardly in the crowd, clearly uncomfortable, overdressed and out of place among the network of polished executives and socialites. My father's jaw was tight, his eyes betraying disbelief. My mother's lips parted as if she were struggling to form words. Matthew's smirk had vanished, replaced by a flicker of something close to panic, and Emily's practiced smile faltered, strained. I felt a thrill of quiet satisfaction, but I reminded myself this wasn't about gloating. This was about closure, a truth they had refused to see for years. I walked toward them slowly, deliberately, letting the sound of my heels accentuate my presence, my spine straight, my chin lifted. I stopped a few feet away and said, voice steady but carrying the weight of years of silence, hello. Their faces shifted in real time, the shock, the disbelief, the discomfort, all perfectly visible. My father's voice, low and almost choked, said, Rebecca, is that really you? I nodded, allowing a small, calm smile to play on my lips, yes. It's me. The same daughter you treated like a maid, except now I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving. My mother opened her mouth to speak but nothing came out, the disbelief rendering her silent, while I pressed on, my voice gaining strength with every word. I've just signed my first major contract. It's worth $4 million. I'm working with Mr. Henderson, building my own career, my own life, and I'm finally free from the invisibility, the dismissals, and the roles you tried to force me into. Matthew's jaw tightened, and he laughed nervously, trying to hide the shock in his eyes. $4 million? You? That doesn't make sense. I looked him straight in the eye, unwavering. It makes perfect sense. You laughed at me when I dared to dream, but I never stopped working. Every day I built myself while you mocked me. And now the results are here. I am capable, I am skilled, I am unstoppable. Emily's face twitched, a mix of anger and disbelief. You're lucky, that's all. I shook my head, a wry smile curling on my lips. No, Emily. I'm not lucky. I'm relentless. I've earned every bit of this with sweat, late nights, mistakes learned, and risks taken. This is not luck. This is proof. My father's face darkened, anger flickering like a storm cloud, his hands clenching into fists. You don't understand what you're saying. All this, you're flaunting it, he growled. I stepped a little closer, but not aggressively, calm but powerful. No, father. I'm not flaunting. I'm showing you what you refused to see for years. I'm showing you that a person ignored, dismissed, and underestimated can rise above it all. That a daughter you treated like a servant can create her own empire. That your words, your insults, your neglect, they didn't break me. They made me stronger. The silence that fell over them wasn't suffocating like the years I had endured, it was brittle, tense, and real, the kind that carries the weight of truth. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need them to understand, didn't need them to approve, didn't need them to say they were proud. I had already proven it, to myself, to the world, and in time, I knew, to them. I looked past them, out over the ocean waves sparkling under the last light of sunset, and felt a surge of peace, the kind of deep, unshakable calm that only comes after years of struggle and finally standing tall in your own power. I whispered under my breath, "This is freedom. This is my life. You can't take this away." And in that moment, I felt no anger, no resentment, only clarity, confidence, and the quiet joy of finally being seen. I walked away toward the gala, toward colleagues who had supported me, toward opportunities waiting for me, and I understood something profound. After years of invisibility and oppression, I had not just survived, I had triumphed. I was finally living my story, my way, on my own terms, and no one could diminish it, not even those who had once been closest to me. The weeks after the gala were a whirlwind, a storm of meetings, conference calls, negotiations, and strategy sessions that left my mind spinning but exhilarated in a way I had never felt before. Every morning, I walked into Henderson Consulting with the same mixture of nerves and determination that had carried me through years of invisibility at home, but now the stakes were higher, the opportunities bigger, and the results finally visible. I was no longer a girl running errands or cleaning up after others. I was a strategist, a negotiator, someone whose insight could make or break multi-million-dollar deals. And with each successful call, each contract amendment, each deal closed, the fire inside me grew stronger, more confident, more unstoppable. The $4 million contract became the foundation, the proof that I could compete in a world that had once seemed impossible to enter. But it wasn't easy, challenges came daily, and I faced resistance not only from external clients but from colleagues who were unaccustomed to someone like me, young, unpolished in appearance but sharp as a razor in intellect, taking on projects they thought were theirs by default. I remember one meeting vividly. The client, a multinational corporation, was skeptical, pushing back on every proposal I presented. My palms sweated, my heart raced, but I stood my ground, citing clauses, presenting projections, anticipating counterarguments with precision. When the meeting ended, the client shook my hand, smiled, and said, "I didn't expect you to know the contract this well, but I trust you. Let's move forward." The words reverberated inside me, a validation I had craved for years, proof that my efforts had not been in vain. And as the deals closed, word began to spread. Henderson, impressed with my tenacity, promoted me to lead smaller teams, giving me the freedom to take risks, to innovate, to expand my reach. I spent late nights mentoring new interns, drawing up proposals, strategizing market expansions, each moment sharpening my skill set, building my reputation. I started dreaming bigger, planning for a future where my name alone carried weight, where contracts and clients sought me out, where my vision could become reality without permission from anyone who had doubted me. The fire that had once only smoldered under the ashes of neglect now burned brightly, lighting the path ahead. Yet, success didn't come without cost. There were nights when exhaustion threatened to collapse me, when setbacks loomed, when a client rejected a proposal I had labored over, or when colleagues undermined my recommendations, whispering doubts into meetings. The old voice in my head, the one my family had reinforced for years, tried to creep back, telling me I wasn't ready, that I couldn't sustain this, that I would fail spectacularly. But I had learned to silence it. I reminded myself of every chore scrubbed, every plate carried, every insult endured, every silent tear shed in that house where I had been invisible. I reminded myself that if I had survived that, I could survive anything. And I did. I pushed through fatigue, through doubt, through criticism, until every success became another step toward my empire. By the end of the year, I had built a small but growing portfolio of clients, each contract more impressive than the last, each negotiation sharpening my confidence. I had gone from being ignored, dismissed, and belittled in my own home to being respected, recognized, and sought after in a high-stakes corporate world. And every time I received a signed contract, a congratulatory email, or a nod of approval from a client, I felt the distance from my past grow, the chains of neglect breaking one by one. I wasn't just Rebecca, the girl my family had treated like a maid. I was Rebecca, the woman who had clawed her way out, built her own empire, and refused to let anyone dictate her worth. And yet, amid all the success, there was a quiet satisfaction that went beyond money, status, or recognition. It was the knowledge that I had faced years of suppression, scorn, and invisibility and had transformed every hardship into a stepping stone. I had turned pain into power, neglect into strategy, silence into voice, and failure into triumph. I walked into Henderson's office one evening, looked at the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning." The city below shimmered like a web of endless opportunity, and for the first time, I saw myself not as someone fighting to survive but as someone destined to rise, to grow, to thrive, to leave a legacy built on resilience, skill, and unshakable determination. I was no longer running from my past, I was using it as the launchpad for everything I would become. I didn't plan to confront them in anger or for revenge, that wasn't what this was about. This was about closure, about showing my family the truth they had refused to see for years, and most importantly, about finally standing fully in my own power. I had worked for months, built my own life, signed more contracts, expanded my client list, and grown my reputation. The fire that had once been suffocated under their dismissive words now burned stronger than ever, and I knew I couldn't carry the past with me any longer without facing it directly. So I made a decision. I would invite them to my new office, not as a servant or a child, but as Rebecca, the woman who had outgrown everything they thought defined her. When they arrived, their expressions were a mixture of disbelief, confusion, and something I wasn't sure was pride yet. My father's jaw was tight, his eyes wary, my mother's lips pressed together as if she was bracing for a storm, Matthew's posture defensive, and Emily's smirk fragile and forced. I gestured toward the sleek office space, the polished desks, the shelves lined with contracts and awards, the city skyline visible through the glass walls. "Welcome," I said, voice steady and clear, "this is my life now." Their eyes scanned the office, the professional atmosphere, and the evidence of the work I had poured myself into, and I could almost see the disbelief registering in their minds. She did all this? She built this? I led them to the main conference table, gesturing for them to sit. "I know this is probably overwhelming for you," I began, keeping my tone calm, measured, "but I want you to see what your daughter has accomplished on her own. No one handed me this. No one paved the way. I wasn't given a head start or encouragement. Every deal, every contract, every client I signed was earned with my own hands, my own knowledge, my own effort." My father opened his mouth, perhaps to interrupt, but I raised a hand gently. "Let me finish. I don't need your approval, I don't need your praise, but I do want you to understand, your treatment of me, the years of dismissal, the constant belittling, didn't stop me. It made me stronger. It forced me to learn, to adapt, to fight, to rise." Matthew shifted in his seat, and I caught a flash of guilt, or maybe respect, in his eyes. "4 million," he muttered, almost incredulous. I nodded, allowing a small, controlled smile, and more. That was just the beginning. This year alone, I've expanded my client base, signed multiple contracts, and proven that I am capable of not just surviving but excelling. Emily's expression faltered, and for a moment, she seemed almost human, real, stripped of her usual pretense. My mother's hands clenched in her lap, and I saw the faintest flicker of recognition in her eyes, the recognition that I was no longer the girl they had tried to confine to a life of invisibility. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze sweeping over each of them. "I'm telling you this not to hurt you, but because it's important you understand. I am no longer a child. I am no longer invisible. I am my own person, with my own success, my own choices, my own path. You cannot control me anymore, and you cannot define me. That chapter of my life is closed. What I do from here is mine. I earned it. I deserve it. And I will not apologize for it." The silence that followed was heavy, but not suffocating. It was different, tentative, brittle, but charged with the weight of truth. Finally, my father's voice broke the quiet, low and uncertain, I didn't realize, his words faltered, trailing off, and for the first time, I saw a human reaction instead of the authoritarian facade. My mother's eyes glistened, a tear threatening to fall, and Matthew and Emily exchanged glances, no words needed, an unspoken acknowledgement that something fundamental had shifted. I didn't gloat, I didn't mock. I simply allowed the truth to exist in the room, letting my accomplishments speak louder than any argument could. As they rose to leave, I felt a calm, profound satisfaction, the kind that only comes after long struggle and the reclaiming of your own power. I whispered under my breath, half to them, half to myself, I am free. I am enough. I am everything you refused to see. And in that moment, standing in my office, surrounded by the tangible proof of years of hard work, I finally felt a sense of completion. I had conquered the challenges of the past, faced the people who had doubted me most, and emerged unbroken, triumphant, and fully in command of my own life. The future stretched out before me, vast and limitless, and I walked toward it without fear, without doubt, with only the certainty that I had earned every inch of the life I was building, and nothing, not even my family, could ever take it from me. The office I had built with my own hands became more than just a workplace. It became a symbol, a monument to resilience, determination, and vision. Every contract signed, every client relationship nurtured, every late night spent calculating, negotiating, and strategizing was a brick in the foundation of something far bigger than I had ever imagined on those nights in my cramped apartment, staring at my notebook and dreaming of freedom. I expanded the business, bringing in talented colleagues who believed in hard work, who valued skill over pedigree, who thrived on challenge and possibility. I mentored young professionals the way I had wished someone had mentored me, sharing lessons learned from mistakes, failures, and relentless perseverance. Every day, I woke up knowing that the fire that had once threatened to consume me in my family home was now fueling the creation of my own legacy, a life that was unapologetically mine. The $4 million contract had been the beginning, a catalyst, but it wasn't the end. I began to sign increasingly larger deals, collaborating with Fortune 500 companies, navigating multi-million-dollar negotiations with precision and confidence, and slowly, inevitably, my name became synonymous with tenacity, intelligence, and strategic brilliance. I traveled for business, attended international conferences, and delivered presentations to audiences that once would have intimidated me beyond words. And yet, despite all the glitz, the awards, the recognition, I never forgot where I had come from. I carried the lessons of my struggle everywhere I went, the long nights, the small victories, the countless times I had been told I was nothing. Those memories weren't anchors, they were wings, propelling me higher every day. Family visits became rare but inevitable. My parents no longer looked at me with disbelief but with a hesitant respect. Matthew and Emily adjusted their attitudes, their earlier arrogance replaced with a quiet acknowledgement of what I had built. It was never about winning arguments or proving dominance. It was about showing, through action, that resilience, dedication, and vision can transform even the smallest spark into a blazing force. And I did more than show them, I inspired them, forcing them to confront their own limitations and the consequences of underestimating someone who refused to be diminished. There were moments of quiet reflection when I stood alone in my office at night, the city lights stretching endlessly through the glass windows, and I thought about the girl I used to be, the girl who scrubbed floors, served meals, and endured neglect in silence. I could almost hear her voice whispering, "You did it. You're free." I smiled to myself, a mix of pride, relief, and gratitude washing over me. Freedom wasn't just leaving my past behind, it was transforming it into power, turning pain into purpose, and refusing to allow anyone, no matter how close, to define my worth again. And then there were the moments of generosity and mentorship, the moments that gave me the deepest satisfaction. I invested in young entrepreneurs who had been overlooked, guided them, and celebrated their victories as if they were my own. I created scholarship programs, offered internships, and built opportunities that reflected the very opportunities one had fought to create for myself. I realized that true success was not only measured in money or contracts but in the ability to lift others, to break cycles of invisibility, and to create pathways where none had existed. The skyline outside my office continued to shimmer with the lights of opportunity, and I knew my story was still unfolding. I had conquered my family's doubts, built a thriving business, and established myself as someone unstoppable. And yet, the most profound realization came quietly, in moments when I wasn't negotiating, closing deals, or strategizing, but simply breathing and reflecting. The girl who had been invisible, the girl who had been dismissed, the girl who had been told she was nothing, she had become someone powerful, someone unshakable, someone whose life was defined not by others but by her own choices, resilience, and vision. As I looked out over the city, the wind brushing against the glass, I whispered, softly but firmly, "This is just the beginning. I am limitless. I am unstoppable. I am mine." And in that moment, I felt it fully, the culmination of every struggle, every late night, every insult, every dismissal transformed into triumph, purpose, and legacy. The past had shaped me, but it did not define me. The future was mine to create, and I was ready, not just to live it, but to soar.